Welcome back to Nightly Nonsense, where we make a bunch of sense out of the nonsense, or we make some nonsense out of the sense. But you got to sift through it. You got to decide what you're going to do with that. We're in the story of Esther. I want to point out a verse in chapter 2, taking it way out of context, right? So the context of chapter 2 is that there's a beauty contest going on, and Esther, right? Esther, a Jewish person, was one of those that was selected, right? And she found herself with the favor of God resting upon her, who then made her in favor with men, right? That whole concept of being favor with men and with God, right? Again, if you're going to find favor with man first, you might be out of favor with God. But if you're going to find yourself in favor with God, He will make you in favor with the men that you need to be in favor with. That doesn't mean everybody, but we see over and over in the story of Daniel and his friends, they consistently, right, were in favor with the people who were put over them. We see that in the story of Esther. And I want to pick it up in verse 12, right? Now, when the turn came for each young woman to go into the king, after being 12 months under the regulations of the women, since this was the regular period of their beautifying, 6 months with oil and myrrh, 6 months with spices and ointments. When the young woman went into the king in this way, right? And then in the evening she would go in, and in the morning she would return to the second harem in the custody of the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubine. She would not go into the king again unless the king delighted in her, and she was summoned by name. You understand the cost of this beauty contest, right? This beauty contest, if you weren't selected as the queen, you went from harem room number 1 to permanent harem room number 2, right? You got one night with the king, and if you didn't please him to the point where he asked for you back, you were going to become a permanent concubine, which means every once in a while, whatever that looked like, right, you'd be called into the king, but not to be his wife, not to be one with him, but to just sleep with him, right, to just service him, to just please him, right? That's what you were reduced to the rest of your life. Now, we could preach a whole bunch on that and turn that around and say there's some times where that's how we're used, right? But that's not what I want to focus on, right? What I want to focus on is this. In verse 15, when the turn came for Esther, the daughter, right, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his own daughter, to go into the king, she asked for nothing except what the king's eunuch, who had been in charge of the women, advised. You understand the importance of this, right? Esther had won favor with God, right? But part of that favor came to be listen to the counsel of those above you. You see the difference here, right? The king got bad counsel, right? Esther, good counsel, godly counsel. And so she followed it. She just took in whatever the guy in charge of her said to take in. Why? Because he would know. She didn't trust herself. She didn't trust what she thought, what she felt, what she heard, what she knew. She trusted somebody who knew the king. Do you do that in your life? Are you getting counsel for people who know what they're talking about? Not people who want to tickle your ears, not people who have been learned, but people who have experienced, people who know. They know what they're talking about, but more importantly, they know who they're talking about. Right? Are you going to people and asking those who know who they're talking about advice, and then following that advice, taking nothing else, leaving everything else aside, right? And trusting in those that God has put over us. That's a really difficult thing, because again, sometimes we put ourselves under people that God hasn't put us under. We willingly choose. It's why the right job matters, because God wants you under the right people. When you just decide to go work for somebody, right, you're going to put yourself under their authority. You're trusting them, and they might not be who God wants in your life. Same thing when it comes to church and play and all the different things in our life. Whose authority are you putting yourself under? And are you obeying that authority? Are you listening to that authority? Not blindly, I'm just going to do whatever these people say, but I believe that God is going to work through this person. I'm putting my trust in God, who's going to use this person in such a way, right, as to give me the promises, the plans of what God has for me. Right? So are you listening to the whole package? Have you surrounded yourself with good, godly counsel? Right? That's going to talk and invest and breathe life into what it is that you and God are going to do. More importantly, what is it that God has planned through you? God had planned for Esther to become the next queen, unbeknownst to her. Right? So she seeks counsel that's going to help her get there. So my question to you tonight is, are you seeking the counsel of people that will get you to the plan? And are you willing to say, I'm gonna trust them? Right? I believe that this is godly counsel. I believe that God is speaking through these people. I'm going to do what they say. There's a lot of people on the that live in the city, reside in the city of regret, that regret that they didn't listen to what people said. They got good counsel. They got good wisdom. They chose not to listen to that counsel, to that advice. They took a bunch of stuff into a moment that they didn't need. I cannot emphasize this enough. God has moments set up for you. People moments, places moments, things moments, right? If you take in more than what God wants you to take in to that moment, you're going to mess the moment up. You're going to junkify the moment. You're going to bring a bunch of stuff in that has no business being there. When you go to talk to somebody, when you go to work something out, you can't take all the extra stuff in. You simply have to go into the moment and say, here's what God has asked me to do. I want this to accomplish. Right? We just had down here a whole day full of meetings and moments with people. Right? In each moment, in each meeting, something different was needed. If we just tried to go in with the same thing, man, we weren't going to accomplish much. But instead, we go in with what God has for us. Go into the moments that God has for you with what God wants you to go in with. Pray. Pray and ask God. Do you know how many times that we've prayed for God to speak to us and he doesn't tell us what he wants or what we want to hear? Where he says to us, this isn't that moment. Don't take this into that moment. Sometimes that's don't be here in that moment. Don't do this in this moment. Sometimes that's change the plans of this moment. But sometimes we're in the right moment with the right stuff and it all just comes together. So think about that. Chew on that. We'll see you next time. Nightly Nonsense.